Thanks a lot, Martin. It's my great pleasure to be invited and present part of my PhD study here. So thank all of you. I think it's a perfect time here to say that my PhD study is actually originally inspired by our first language and education symposium in 2009. And you can see that we have Professor Michael Halliday and Rikan Hassan to deliver the speech in that year. And we have our Poly people here. Because the picture is a little bit small and old, sorry Gail, I cannot find you. But now you're always in the middle of the gentleman as beautiful as the star. So my PhD study is actually motivated by one of the talk given by Professor Francis Christie. I'm Professor Francis Christie and Dr. Wang's book, School Dispersonally to Write Across a Year of Schooling. And they analyze the students' writing from early primary to late adolescence to identify the different lexical-grammatical choices they will make in a certain stage in their writing. So this is a picture that me and Francis are meeting in a beautiful Sydney Queen Victoria building. Which is a very lovely memory. I'm really interested in language development, but why we need language development? As Halliday has put, the better informed the language teacher is about language, the more successful the learning is likely to be. So my interpretation that would be, we don't need to teach students about language. That means we don't need to teach students about this language as a so complicated map and system. Language is about making choices, about meaning potential. We don't need to teach students that. But as a language educator and as a language teacher, the better we inform that as a language is making choices as a map. And then the better will be easier to the teacher will be easier and better to manipulate these kind of different choices in certain stage and in certain situations. Okay, and then there will be more successful the learning is like to be. This is the table that I reviewed some of the non-systemic functional linguistic approach to the language development. And you can see that it's tend to be more structural rather than functional. And they identified some of the structural lexical-grammatical features that develops from early age to the early adolescence. So my interest would be what I reviewed these kind of studies that all of them are in first language learning context. So my interest would be what about second language learning context, and particularly as we say that we are using language in different situations, we are making choices. So we're making choices that in this situation we use these choices of lexical-grammatical features. And as a textbook designer and educator, when we design a curriculum and when we design a textbook, we make choices as well. We make choices that in certain stage, what kind of lexical features that we offer to the students, and we expect students to be master and these kind of features in certain stage. So I'm really interested in how to describe this decision and to find that informative insights and pedagogic implications. So I refer to one of the questioner's lecture notes. I would like to say that linguistics tests offered in the textbook to the three levels. First of all, I would like to identify the different text types of this linguistic test to identify the context, and then combine the semantic and lexical-grammatical features to discuss in details that how this kind of language developments offered in textbooks through the year of schooling. I'm choosing Hong Kong and Chinese mainland context because both of them are EFL and ESL context, and they are slightly different because they have different cultural background and they have different educational level. So this is textbook I'm choosing for Hong Kong textbooks. This is primary 4 in Hong Kong textbook, junior 1 and senior 1. All of them are published by Longman Press. And I'm choosing these 3 stages as a pilot study to see that how this language development moved from primary to junior secondary and to senior secondary. So first of all, I would like to identify the different text types offered in the linguistic test, excluding the exercise in textbooks. So I located all these tests, almost like around 200 tests, locate them within this discursive pine of fortune, and try to say that how the language and this text develops from primary to junior secondary and to senior secondary. So I'd like to share some of the results with you. This is a Hong Kong textbook for primary 4, and let's add to junior 1. So you can see that in sharing, we have a certain number of sharing tests in primary 4 textbook and a little bit more in junior secondary 1, and reporting as well. And then we add to senior 1 secondary, and you see the beautiful continuum of the reporting test from a little bit more gradually. And as long time is very limited, so this is another way of displaying of the Chinese medium textbooks. So as time is limited, in this presentation, I want to focus on that how the students learn to present their ideas and attitudes and feelings through these different text types. Okay, so I would like to focus within the 8 text typology. I would like to feel that more tenor-oriented, as Christian has just mentioned, sharing, recommending, and exploring. So why I'm looking at that? Because in both Hong Kong and Chinese mainland curriculum, that the skills of presenting information, ideas, attitudes, and feelings is stated very explicitly, very important in the curriculum. So let's go back to the diagram that I showed to you. So let's take a very close look at this kind of more tenor-oriented text typology. So you can see the red is primary 4, the blue is junior 1, and senior is green. So you can see from primary 4 to junior secondary, there is a more sharing test in the textbooks, but much fewer in senior secondary. And then you can see the recommended test. You can see that from primary to senior secondary, there is more recommended test, and no exploring test in primary 4, no exploring test for junior 1, and no exploring test and much more, a certain number of exploring tests in senior 1. So you can see, I found a very interesting example in these 3 typologies in the textbook. Like for example, like sharing, it's like sharing your personal views and experience with friends, with families, and with the person who are very familiar with, like daily conversation and personal blog. And recommending is, I find a very interesting example, like poster of the restaurant and leaflet of fitness club or fitness center, and also some very interesting example exploring tests, like to trying to review that we should build or we should not build McDonald's in our community, or it's kind of exploring tests like trying to debate and recommend, saying that the law should be monitored to the usage of air conditioner in the Hong Kong textbooks. So you can see that a kind of development from sharing to recommending and to exploring. So that's kind of things we can, after we counting the quantity of the different text types in the textbook, that move to the lexical-grammatical features to discuss in details how this language development happens in the textbooks. So let me show you some examples of sharing primary textbooks. The first one is daily conversation. I like dumplings, fish, orange juice. I don't like onions, green tea, or porridge. And this example of personal blog. So let me look at the language. So you can see that they use I like, I don't like, this kind of simple verb to trying to identify their affect, their attitudes, their feeling. And they have modality, like I think, explicitly subjective modality to introduce their prepositions. And adjective like good, smart, faster, to facilitate their appreciation and judgment. very great specials, great, that using this adjective to facilitate appreciation, and using the mood adjunct of intensity, like just, only. Example like would be, especially one has beef and onion and it's just 10 RMB for 15 dumplings, which is rich. Special 2 is only 8 RMB for 15, and orange juice is only 2 RMB. So this is maybe it's a very old China thing, so it won't be happening now. So you can see they're using the mood adjunct to facilitate the intensity. And also they're using imperative clause to ask for action. So what about senior secondary? So this is the test that against that McDonald's is not healthy, that we should not build McDonald's in our community. And you see the language here. Again, they use adjective like this, I'm very worried, and verb like we enjoy our local dishes to express your attitude. And you can see very interesting thing that you can see that the course level is becoming more complicated. Like they're using the dependent clause as a marked thing to introduce the background for the background information. Like when scientists look at very carefully, we find high levels of fat, sugar, and salt. And sometimes they have different types of dependent clause, like although it is freshly cooked, like concession, and too many young people are getting fat through eating too much food, like manna. And especially, you can see that eating too much fatty foods, like long finite clauses appears and emerges in senior secondary here. I would like to share one more example of senior secondary in Hong Kong. There is an editorial to trying to explain the serious situation of indoor air quality in Hong Kong. And you can see that in junior secondary, that the student, the textbook offers the mood adjunct of intensity to say very, only, or limiting the adjunct, limiting the intensity mood adjunct to say only, just. And then it moves to sensibly, this common adjunct, to trying to add attitudinal color and your attitudes, your feeling into the expression. As we report today, is using dependent clause as a marked thing to introducing the background. Clearly, comment adjunct to add attitudinal color. And you can see the modalities here. They're using, in primarily using I think, I suppose, this kind of explicitly subjective modality. They move to implicit subjective modality like should, need, can, and could to facilitate the proposal. So let me summarize some of the points here. So you can see that mood adjunct explains, realize different kinds of interpersonal meanings. First of all, in primary, using mood adjunct of high intensity, very, then move to the mood adjunct of limiting intensity, only, just. And then to the secondary, using a comment adjunct, like sensibly, clearly, to use to add significant attitudinal color in text. And attitudinal expression express. So in primary, using a very simple verb or adjective to express your attitudes and feeling, and then move to the students play with the language and using different lexical choices and across all areas of lexical grammar. And like even more worrying is finding that at three of the school, indoor and outdoor pollution levels were almost exactly the same. So you can see that it's like embedded the process. What is even more worrying and adding the mood adjunct almost exactly to facilitate attitude and feelings. And the mood options expands as well. So from positive declarative to imperative, interactive, negative and declarative. So the students are playing with the language using the different mood options to express their attitude. And modality is very interesting looking as well. So like I said, is they're moving from I think, I suppose, this kind of explicit subjective and to implicit subjective to say should, can, must. So it's at the edge of objection and trying to hand you very obvious subjective opinions in the explicit subjective modality. So course level is very interesting to look at as well. You can see that in primary a lot of singular, and in senior secondary singular, but sometimes we're linked by a simple active adjunctive relations like add. But move to the senior secondary is very complicated and move to the complexity. So they put in a dependent clause of time as marked thing in order to foreground the information involved, like for example when blah blah blah. And secondly, they're using a dependent clause image like result, so and so that, concession, although, though, and manner through. And the third very important point is they're using a non-finite clause to facilitate their explanation. So one interesting thing is that what I found in senior secondary, I go back to the literature to see that Francis Christian and Van der Rohe has found. Very interesting, the first feature of what I found in senior secondary is they found in mid-primary. And secondly, the second point which I found in senior secondary, we found in junior secondary. And thirdly, that's the point matches finally, as in mid-secondary. So you can see the changes and the challenges that the students are facing. So in junior and primary, they may not facing that much kind of challenge and pressure, but in senior secondary, what the first language learner has mastered in very early stage, they need to master all of them in senior secondary. So I did lexical density as well to calculating the number of lexical items. That means to not calculating the grammatical items like articles, prepositions, pronouns. So which I analyzed the text I analyzed that just before to say still the challenging for the students in senior secondary. So what I'm just arise to discussion is the point of pressure. So, but don't worry, it is not the unique case in Hong Kong and Mainland China. It is a case all over the round world, but in different stages. In UK, the students are aged 11 to 14. They identify that there is a literature gap in this kind of stage. And in Australia, there is a technical term called middle years. The students are found that the teachers are found particularly need to scaffold more to enhance the children's literacy during these years. So what I'm trying to arise here is it doesn't matter that we find some kind of pressure and challenging for students, but the better as language educator and language teacher, we know this kind of pressure, and to be specific, we know that how language exactly develops in this particular stage, then the better we will help students to get a very good transition in these kind of key stages of pressure, of challenge. So I'm looking forward to the future, and it's very interesting to look exactly what happened to the transitional stage. That is grade 6 to junior secondary 1, junior secondary 3 to senior secondary 1, and to senior secondary 3. So it's very interesting to see that how these changes happen, and exactly that how can we describe these challenges the students are facing, and then the better the teachers can be more easily and to scaffold the students to make a very smooth transition. And also point of input and output, as what I'm analyzing is the expectation, the textbooks, the expectation of the students, but how to what extent the students can reach this kind of expectation is very interesting as well. Yeah, it's my time to play back now. Yeah, so Winfrey is doing his PhD on students writing in secondary. So Christian, Winfrey, and me will think it will be very interesting to compare both of that study to look at how the input and output differentiate with each other, or how they correlate with each other. There's very interesting analysis. And this is me when I was still young and fresh, teaching primary grade 6 in Beijing. So it what they learn from the classroom, from school, they pay the actual money to teach them more so they can make a very good transition in junior secondary. So this just picture reminds me that after I analyze all the tests, I need to go back to see that how classroom is used in a textbook and how teachers' comments and feedback will be given to this kind of point of pressure and point of challenging. Okay, so thank all of you for your patience and many thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I think we still have a few minutes for questions.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How do you see the future of textbooks? Do you see that we should be putting more challenge into the primary ones? And is it that we should be setting our expectations higher at an earlier age?
Yeah, that's very good. That's the things I'm thinking when I couldn't sleep. Yeah, that's a very interesting thing to say that after what I have analyzed and what we found that there's a challenge and a point of pressure to the students, what we should do. So I think it will be very good that I can interview some of the textbook designer, which may be Nicholas, of course, to say that what's there in their mind. So why they put like a lot of pressure and challenge in senior secondary? I think because maybe it's part of it because it's second language learning context. Because at that stage, students' cognitive is still at the early stage, and then move to the senior secondary. Then when they master the different functions of language, and they master the different lexical-grammatical features of language, and then they cognitively are mature enough. So maybe it will be easier for students to master a little bit more pressure and challenge in senior secondary. But I don't know. But yes, like I said, I need to go back to the classroom to say that how textbook design, how textbook used, and to interview textbook designer, how textbook designed, and also to say to look at students' writing to say that how the students can be expected to reach that certain stage. But many thanks for your question.
If we can have one more question.
I think. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I found it very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I did not see any comparison between the Mainland textbook and Hong Kong textbook. Is there any difference?
Oh, thank you very much for your question, because I run out of time, so I deliberately not to include in my point, but thank you for your question. So that's the things I'm really interested in look at it as well. So what I'm found just now is within the text typology and in terms of typology and in terms of lexical-grammatical features, I think Hong Kong textbook is doing better than Chinese textbooks. Sorry, I have to say that. Because in Chinese textbook, you will find more pressure and more challenging in senior secondary. So that's the things I think about many times to see that why. And then it reminds me that when I was still very young to say that the education level varies in Chinese Mainland. So sometimes the students and in sometimes schools, primary school, senior secondary, primary school in Mainland China, they will not teach English. So there is a pressure for the Education Bureau in Mainland China. So they cannot put junior secondary at a very high level because some of them will know nothing about English. So that's a very important thing, and that's a very interesting thing to look at in Mainland China. And I want to share one personal experience with you is why I'm looking at textbook, because I want to look at how different lexical-grammatical choices they're designed by the textbook designer. So, for example, I want to say that when I was still young, I was taught English like this way. So, the answer to how are you is nothing but fine, and you? So, everybody is answering that question like fine, and you? And some of the friends in the United States, old friends, are saying that most of the Chinese went to the United States, and they answered the question about how are you, and they just Firstly, they were just very nervous. And then secondly, fine, Andrew. Everybody's the same. So I think it's just the better informed, the better the concept that textbook designer has had a concept in their mind, that language about making choices. So different choices they will offer to the students. As the students, they need expected to reach, expected to master in that certain stage. Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
So after Nancy's talk on talking about textbooks, then now we'll have Mrs. Betty Lee.